Hi, I am Dr. Felice Gersh, your integrative OBGYN physician. Well, here we are, the first week of 2025, and many of us have New Year's resolutions. And that's a good thing because this time of year is when we take stock of what matters to us. And I hope that all of you are putting optimizing health really high on your list. Well, in order to be optimally healthy, you need to have a reasonably optimal body composition. So that's about how much muscle you have, how much fat you have, and where they are distributed. Along with having an optimal body composition, you need to have a reasonably optimal weight. Many of us have New Year's resolutions that include weight optimization. And for most of us, that means weight loss. A few, it's weight gain. But we're going to talk today about weight loss and what you can do naturally. I want to talk about what you can do on your own, maybe with sometimes some medical assistance, but a lot of what you can do on your own to truly optimize your weight and, because this goes together, your body composition. Because you can step on a scale and you could be the same weight as someone else, but have a dramatically different amount of fat versus muscle. So body composition really matters. I do want to emphasize that when we lose weight, what we don't want to lose is vital lean body mass, predominantly muscle. Muscle is like precious cargo on our bodies. We do not want to lose our muscle. Muscle is the burning organ for burning glucose and fat. Most of the glucose in our body is consumed in muscle. So it's so important to have adequate muscle supply. And we're going to talk about that because what determines whether you gain weight or you lose weight? Well, it's a combination of how much intake you take, like AKA eating food. So we'll say fuel in, because food is like fuel to our body. So it's how much fuel you put into your body versus how much you burn, the creation of energy. That is called what? Metabolism. So metabolism is the creation, utilization, storage, distribution of energy. So in order to lose weight, you need to have less energy coming in than what you're burning. So there are two ways to look at this. One way, and the most traditional way to lose weight, is to consume less fuel, known as eating less. So that is really hard to sustain for the rest of your life, but that will definitely help you lose weight. Unfortunately, if you go on a starvation type of diet where you drastically cut calories, drastically eat little compared to what your body would normally want to consume to maintain all of your energetic needs, you will be hungry, okay? You're going to be hungry for a long time. You will have to maintain a starvation type of diet, caloric restriction. That's what it's called. And it's really hard to be on a severe caloric restricted diet and not be malnourished because you got to get in all the vital nutrients, the micro and the macronutrients, and yet consume far fewer calories than your body would need to maintain the weight, to keep losing weight. And we know that when you do a starvation type of diet, a massive caloric restricted diet, if you start eating normally, even reasonably, because your metabolic rate will decrease, you will regain that weight. So for example, if you go on a very low calorie diet and you lose 50 pounds, so say you started at 200, you get down to 150, and somebody else weighs 150 and they've been stable, but you're both 150, but one lost 50 pounds, the other didn't lose any or gain any. It's just been stable at 150. In order for the individual, it could be you, to maintain that 50-pound weight loss and stay at 150, that person has to eat several hundred calories a day less than the individual who was always at 150, because the metabolic rate has shifted down. That's why almost 100%, you can never say 100%, but almost 100% of people who lose weight through severe caloric restriction, like a starvation diet, severe restricted eating, they gain the weight back, and those diets fail. That's one reason why people who lose weight on the GLP-1 receptor agonists, I'm only mentioning this once, I'm not going to be talking about those drugs, but people who are on those drugs, if they stop them, they gain the weight back, because the weight that's lost is basically through a starvation type of diet. Okay, so we need to realize that. That's why those drugs are forever, because they suppress appetite, at least we think, forever. But it's really hard to maintain a forever life of eating very little food, especially if you're not on a drug that chronically suppresses your appetite. So if we agree, I hope we do, that going on a starvation diet is not the best way to meet your goals of weight loss in 2025, then what else can we do? Well, remember, it's input versus output. So why don't we focus more on output? So how can we do that? How can we burn more fuel? We have to up our metabolic rate. So we want to, first of all, take in the best fuel possible, also known as high quality food. Food that does not create inflammation, because inflammation is the enemy of weight loss and everything else. And we want to nourish our gut microbiome and reduce inflammation. So let's talk about what can you do to increase your metabolic rate naturally. Well, we'll go through a few things. One, we need to lower inflammation. So what happens if you have inflammation? That means that your immune system is upregulated in a pro-inflammatory state. You're producing these inflammatory cytokines, these messengers of inflammation that circulate throughout the body. What happens when you're in this pro-inflammatory state increases insulin resistance. Now, insulin is a vital hormone. In fact, if you don't have it, like for example, if you have type 1 diabetes, you will die. It's that simple. You cannot live without insulin. But like a lot of things that are really good, too much of a good thing and you're in trouble. So just like food, you can eat too much food and you're in trouble, but you need to have food to live. You need to have insulin to live. But when you have too much insulin, you have insulin resistance, and your pancreas puts out more insulin to do what? To try to move the glucose in your blood, the sugar in your blood, from in the blood to in the cells that need that glucose as a fuel to create energy in the cell. Well, it turns out that insulin, among its varied and critically important functions, is the production and storage of fat, adipose tissue. And you cannot easily, if at all, lose weight when you have high levels of insulin. That's why people who have insulin resistance, that's like pre-diabetes, or even before you get to even pre-diabetes, you have high levels of insulin. In fact, you can have normal blood sugars, but at the expense of having higher amounts of insulin to move the sugar from the blood into the cells. And what happens is you produce and store more fat, and you can't burn fat and make fat at the same time. Bodies cannot multitask that way. So how can you lower insulin resistance? Well, you can improve your gut microbiome the microbes, this collection of trillions of microscopic life forms, bacteria and viruses, archaea, fungi that live in our gut, the biggest, most complex ecosystem of microbes. And how can we do that? We do not want to have dysbiotic gut microbiota. That's abnormal growth of microbes in our gut. Because when you do not make properly the protective mucus coating that protects the lining of the gut. And so toxins, we call them endotoxins or lipopolysaccharides in the gut, they come right up to the lining cells and they degrade the little fibers that hold those cells together because that protective mucus coating is not being made. In order for that to be made, you have the right microbes plus our own cells in our gut. The Panus cells, the goblet cells together, they make this protective mucus, protective layer. But when that's not there, because you don't have the right microbes, the toxins in the gut get right up to the lining, degrade the little fibers that hold those cells together. They start drifting apart, and toxins in the gut leak into the body proper, where so much of the immune system resides. And the immune system goes crazy and starts producing pro-inflammatory cytokines. So you have inflammation in the body, which leads to insulin resistance. So heal the gut microbial population and heal the leaky gut. So we do that by giving a combination of fermented foods, things like sauerkraut and kimchi, and probiotics. And we want to have food that nourish the good microbes, and that is plant fibers. So across all the colors of the rainbow, because we want to have a diversified gut microbial population. You don't want to just have one type. You want lots of types, thousands of types. So you need to have a diversified diet of all kinds of plants. So we're talking about legumes, all kinds of beans and lentils and nuts and seeds, all different kinds. They act as wonderful fibers for the gut microbes to munch on and create a healthy gut microbial population to support the production of that protective mucus coating. So we need to heal the gut microbial population and heal the gut lining, that leaky gut, also known as the intestinal barrier. So we've got to work on that to lower inflammation and insulin resistance. So what else can contribute to this inflammation that increases insulin resistance? Toxicities in our environment, like heavy metals, like arsenic, which generally comes from water supply and rice, because rice absorbs water. So we want to be careful about the water. We want to have it tested or talk to our water supply system, use a water purifier. So we want to also avoid other toxicities like plastics, BPA and BPS and phthalates. We want to avoid pesticides. We want to avoid the artificial colorings, preservatives, and so on. Cleaning products. We don't want to be exposed to solvents like styrene and xylene and benzene. These actually can cause inflammation, insulin resistance, and weight gain. What about stress? So when people have high stress, the part of the system of the body called the autonomic nervous system goes into sympathetic overload. That's the autonomic nervous system component. That's part of the stressor part. And part of that is the adrenergic component. Adrenergic as in adrenal. So you stimulate the adrenal gland in a stress state to produce more cortisol. Well, it turns out that chronically high cortisol from chronic stress creates leaky gut. Once again, it impacts the gut barrier. You'll have leaky gut, you'll have inflammation, insulin resistance, and fat deposition and fat storage. Also, sleep. When you have night travel and night working and circadian dysfunction, you actually dysregulate the immune system as well. This immune system is very circadian. We have a different immune system when you're in the day and when you're in the night, and when it gets all mixed up, you go into a more pro-inflammatory state. So going to bed preferably at the same time, a reasonable time between around 10 to 11. You want to get a minimum of 6.5 hours of sleep and less than 9 hours. So the sweet spot is probably around 7, maybe 7.5 hours a night for sleep for an adult. But you don't want to oversleep, and you definitely don't want to undersleep. And you don't want to go to bed at all different odd hours, and you want to go to sleep so that by 2 a.m. you can get that big spike of melatonin and you drop your cortisol. And this will promote weight loss and lower inflammation. Melatonin, which spikes at 2 a.m., is one of the most potent antioxidants in the body. In fact, it's the most potent renewable, because you have to keep making it, antioxidant of the body. Isn't that amazing? So in terms of losing weight, there's so much that we can do to increase our metabolic function by improving insulin function, insulin sensitivity, and lowering the insulin resistance that is so prevalent now throughout our society. And what about muscle? So muscle, I mentioned, it's precious cargo. Muscle is what burns our fuel. If we lose our muscle, you will gain weight. If you lose weight with the starvation diet, you will always lose muscle. It's not a question of if, it's a question of how much. So we do not want to lose that precious cargo. So we want to try to grow more of it. So how do we grow more of it? We do resistance training. But if we do not have proper hormones, we're not going to grow muscle adequately. So what hormones do women need? Women need estradiol. Estradiol, the estrogen that's made from the ovaries or that you can give to women transdermally through the skin as menopausal and perimenopausal treatment, helps to grow muscle. And muscle is so critical. Now, what's the structure in muscle that actually burns fat and glucose? It's mitochondria, the energy-burning factories of cells. Well, it turns out that estradiol is critical for all aspects of mitochondrial function, for their survival, their adequate functionality, and so on. So if you are deficient in adequate amounts of estradiol as a female at any stage of life, you will not have adequate function of your mitochondria. You will not be able to grow muscle properly and adequately burn fuel, fats, and glucose. Now, what about androgens? Well, they're very important too, of course, in men and in women. One that you can buy over the counter, I don't know why, but it's an adrenal androgen, predominantly adrenal, 80% comes from the adrenal gland, is DHEA. There are studies showing that just taking DHEA in a woman, there are many other benefits, but just focusing on weight, that women have lost inches around their waistline. They've lost belly fat just from adding DHEA. And what's the sweet spot for a level? Probably 100 or so. So you can measure in a blood test your DHEAS. You don't measure DHEA, measure DHEAS. And you want that to be in the neighborhood of around 100. And even if it's around 100 and you really need to lose weight, as long as you're staying under 200, you're not going to be in a toxic range. And this is over the counter. So typically, I don't go over 25 milligrams a day. Men will go up 50 or even higher. And there have been women who've gone up to 50, but I get concerned about androgenic effects like growing facial hair or getting acne or losing the hair on the top of your head, what's called, androgenic alopecia. And once you get over 25, I want you to be under the care of a medical professional, okay? And if there's a question, always check with your medical professional. I'm not giving you direct medical advice. I'm giving you information. Okay, so you have to always keep that in mind, because I don't know you, and I don't know your situation. Testosterone, another androgen, about 75% of testosterone in a female, a healthy reproductive age female, about 75% comes directly or indirectly through precursors of testosterone converted into testosterone and fat tissue. So about 75% directly or indirectly comes from the adrenal gland, and about 25% from the ovaries. And testosterone is very important as well for building muscle, among other things. So women, get your estradiol level checked, your DHEAS checked, your testosterone level checked. Get a body composition. You want to know how much muscle and how much fat you have. So what's ideal is probably about 22% body fat in a woman. And you don't want to get too low. Women are not supposed to have really, really low body fat. We're not men. Don't go for 14%. That's too low. Women are supposed to have more healthy subcutaneous fat. That's what gives us curves. We're not supposed to be like stick figures, okay? But we're not supposed to have big fat bellies and a lot of visceral fat. If there's a question, check your liver for fat. Now it's called hepatic metabolic steatosis. That can be checked with an ultrasound. Because if you have liver fat, you definitely need to work on losing that fat, because that is critically important for your overall health as well. So that brings me to another area that can help with weight loss, types of fasting. So there's different types of fasting. There's 24-hour types within the 24 hours, which we call time-restricted eating. Our insulin works best in the morning. So if you eat most of your food in the morning, the first half of the day, your body will have less elevation of glucose and insulin. If you eat more of your food at night, you'll have higher levels of insulin and glucose. We're doing it wrong, guys. Most of us are eating most of our food at night. If you're really trying to lose weight, push your food into the first part of the day and try to eat very little at night. Have at least 3 hours from the time you finish dinner. If you have dinner, try to make it as early as possible and make that, if you can, the smallest meal of the day, and then have 13 hours of fasting. You can drink non-caloric beverages like herbal teas from dinner until breakfast, and try to have breakfast be a big meal, or if you just don't want a big breakfast, try to have lunch be a big meal. If you're really trying to lose weight, you want to put most of your calories into the first part of the day. And you want to have breakfast, because that will help lower your cortisol. You don't want to have high cortisol. I already told you that's going to push to insulin resistance and leaky gut. So your body needs fuel in the morning when it's most receptive, and you're going to get the most efficient use of that fuel. And then don't snack. Every time you eat, you raise your blood sugar and your insulin. Just remember, if you're having elevated glucose and insulin, you're going to not be able to lose weight. So don't eat more than 3 times a day, and don't snack between meals unless you're trying to gain weight. And fast for 13 hours. You can do more if you want, but that's like a sweet spot. You can do 14 hours, 15 hours, but mainly aim for 13 hours from dinner to breakfast. No snacks. And if you want to lose weight, it's been shown that exercising in the morning is more conducive to weight loss than exercising late in the day. Okay, so that is really helpful. Now, you can do other forms of fasting, like the fasting mimicking diet. The brand name for that is Prolon, and they have published studies showing that if you keep doing it, like on a monthly basis for the 5 days, you can lose substantial amounts of liver fat, that really toxic fat in your liver that is so harmful to you. You can help reboot the gut with the gut microbiome. And so there's many benefits for improving metabolic health. You can also do the 5-2, where you either fast with just water or you do a modified fast where you eat no more than 25% of your calories for 2 non-consecutive days of the week. By doing that intermittent type of fasting, whether it's fasting mimicking diet or the 5-2, you won't lower your metabolic rate. Remember, you do not want to lower your metabolic rate because then every time you lose weight, your body needs fewer and fewer calories to maintain that new lower weight. It's almost impossible to maintain. It's really not leading to success. This has been proven time and time again. I want you to be successful. I don't want you to have yo-yo dieting. When you lose weight, you will always lose some muscle. If you do yo-yo dieting, you will be unhealthier than if you never lost the weight in the first place because you're losing muscle and then you're regaining fat. So you want to work on your gut microbiome. You want to work on sleep. You want to reduce exposures to toxicants. You want to work on stress. You want to exercise and do resistance training to build muscle. You want to eat high quality food to nourish your gut microbial population and heal that leaky gut. If you really do this and then you eat high quality plant-based focused foods, you eat no processed foods that are ultra processed, only the very lightly processed foods, like you can buy pre-made organic sauerkraut or pickles or mustard. I don't expect you to make everything from scratch, but most everything from scratch. Have some of your food raw and some of your food cooked. Try to, if you can, have close to half of your vegetables uncooked. That's giant salads. Fill your meals and your plates with all kinds of high fiber foods to nourish your gut microbes, and take a few targeted supplements. You've probably all heard of berberine. Berberine is an alkaloid extract from plants like the Oregon grapefruit, which has helped with changing the gut microbiome, which seems to then relate to insulin sensitivity and better insulin function. Other things that lower inflammation, like curcumin, the absorbable kind, is very good. You can do other things like boswellia is anti-inflammatory, and you can improve your mitochondrial function. Remember, that's where you burn. That's the fact. Those are like the fireplaces that burn the fuel, the mitochondria, and you can use products that have urolithin A, like the Pure Encapsulations Renewal or the Timeline MitoPure. Urolithin A helps to create more energy by improving mitochondrial function. And you can also take the absorbable form of CoQ10, ubiquinol, to also help your mitochondria to function better. And you want to optimize your hormones. You want to have optimal estradiol, and you want to have your androgens, DHEA, DHEAS, testosterone, and the one hormone. Of course, all the hormones matter, but the other area that I didn't mention is your thyroid. Now, everyone knows if you have low thyroid, you're not going to be losing weight. So how can you improve your thyroid naturally? Make sure you have the nutrients, the micronutrients that are essential for proper production of thyroid, T4, and its conversion to the active type of thyroid, T3, by making sure that in your diet or through some proper supplementation, you have iron, you have zinc, you have selenium, you have iodine. These are critical, okay? You need these along with others. You also want to have adequate copper. So that's why eating across the colors of the rainbow, taking a good multi-mineral supplement, a good multivitamin, can all be beneficial. And you can get micronutrient testing if you would like, so that you can actually see what nutrients you may be insufficient in your body. So all of this together will help you to lose weight and keep it off, and not lose vital muscle mass, not lose lean body mass, and lose the visceral fat, not the support fat. There are ways to naturally optimize your body composition. This is the time of year when we dedicate ourselves to making this new year the best year